Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tara Nicholas. I'm a business officer with Derry and Strabane Council, and we are delighted to welcome you all here today to our Northern Ireland cyber security event, Securing Your Business from Cyber Attacks, as part of our Derry Strabane Enterprise Week 2021. Northern Ireland Security Centre work to make Northern Ireland cyber safe, secure and resilient for all its citizens and businesses. They are focused on ensuring that we have a better informed society and business community to better protect their technology, systems and data from cyber attacks. I would like to advise that today's webinar will be recorded, including any questions and answers that are asked. We will have a question and answer session at the end, so we will answer all questions at that stage. And you are more than welcome to enter these questions via the chat box at any stage as we move through the presentations, and I will filter these through to the relevant speaker at the end of the session. Finally, I would like to say that I hope you find this programme relevant and beneficial and wish you well on your way to achieving your business ambitions. I would now like to introduce Joe Dolan from the NI Cybersecurity team to make the introductions to this morning's session.
Tara, thanks for the introduction. Hopefully everybody can hear me. It's hard to know these things, whether or not you're getting the right sound levels and stuff. So welcome everybody. It's really good here to be able to be part of the Derry Strabane Enterprise Week. Like Tara, I hope you find this lineup useful, informative, and mostly helps you to be able to protect yourself from what we see as the new pandemic, which is cyber attacks. Which is happening right across, not just Northern Ireland, but UK and wider afield. I'm going to share my screen here and take you through the presentation. Okay, everybody see that okay? Sure you've got, yep. Okay, so as Tara says, Joe Dolan, I head up the Northern Ireland Cybersecurity Centre. And as Tara says, our role is to make Northern Ireland cyber safe, secure, and resilient for its citizens and business. So what do we mean by cyber safe, secure and resilient? So in terms of safety, it is about informing businesses, citizens, businesses of all sizes, small, medium and large, and the voluntary and community sector about what the cyber threats are, what's currently out there, what do we need to be aware of. In terms of cyber security, what are the practical steps and activities and actions that you can take to make you less likely to be a victim of that cyber threat. And in terms of resilience, no matter what you hear from people, there is absolutely no such thing as a perfect secure system. So you can reduce the risk to yourself, but there may be occasions where you become victim of a cyber attack. So what do you do to help yourself to respond to that? And hopefully today, we'll give you some of the basic steps to start you on that journey if you're not already on it. We can't do it. My sister used to say to my mum, you can't learn somebody, you can teach them. It's only that person who can learn from what's being taught. So we can definitely bring the information, the advice and guidance to you, but it's only through collective responsibility, through partnership, through stakeholder engagement, and through behavioural change, both in ourselves and our businesses, will we actually become a much more safer society. I want to start off by showing you a video. You may have seen this before. Apologies. I don't make any apologies actually if you have, because no matter how many times I see this, I always learn something from it. It's about a big business, but actually what happens here is happening right across all sizes of business.
How did you decide to become a hacker?
Well, I'm not really sure what it means to become a hacker. That's like some guy in a hoodie who types really fast and stays up all night writing code and cracking passwords. It's not me. I just spy on people and see what makes them click. It's not a bad job.
Mark Hanning, CEO of Qualicart, set to report earnings after their blockbuster IPO.
So you consider this a job?
I put a lot of work into this. I'm not lazy. It takes research to figure out the key players, learn all about them, their families, their friends, what they care about. You have to understand the company's organization. I get a lot of my information from the sales department because they're always so quick and eager. They're hungry. People trust too easily. They don't look at the details. I do. Details matter. That's what I'm good at. It has to look completely believable. It has to look familiar. This is where research is important. It's not some generic piece of spam. It's an email from their boss with their company's signature. It's written in the voice of the boss. It's what he would say if he were writing this.
What about the malware itself? How does that work?
Somebody else out there already wrote all the code that does the actual attack. I'm just using it in the attachment. My skill is in my ability to get a bunch of people to click on that attachment. I always wonder what it's like when the whole thing unfolds on their end, when the panic sets in.
Please leave your message after the beep.
Hey, this is Rajiv in finance. Call me as soon as you get this. Something's up with my laptop. I can't.
Katie, are you on your way into the office? Something's going on with our file servers.
Karen in HR, our benefits dashboard seems really slow. We're getting calls from users on it. Give me a call when you get this. Joining conference now.
Apparently, there's a malware attack targeting our main...
It's ransomware. They're holding us hostage.
We're locked out of everything. I can't even check my phone. What about the backup?
That will take days.
We need this fixed now. You pay it. We don't have a choice. We're reporting earnings in 2 hours.
But how do we know that they'll...
Pay it. Put every single person on getting us back up and running. That's the only priority now.
Okay, it's done.
I have the decrypt key. Mark, we have a big problem. The ransomware was just to distract us. They got inside. They got everything. Customer data, financials, everything.
Qualicards is reeling today from the news that hackers have released the personal information of nearly
The
2
Nasdaq
million
closed
customers.
lower today, led by Qualicard, which was down 14% on news that the recent data breach may be far worse than the company
Its
originally
stock fell to a
acknowledged.
new all-time low on news that CEO Mark Hanning is stepping down after what is turning out to be one of the worst breaches of personal information in recent history.
Do you feel bad about releasing the personal information? All the financials? All the money that was lost?
All I did was get the files. I'm not the one that decided to release them. I'm not the one that shorted the stock. Somebody else had their reasons for that. It's above my pay grade. I was paid to do a job, and I did it well. And that's what's expected of anyone, isn't it? Anyway, markets bounce back.
That was a video released by Cisco 2013, so a number of years ago, but we are seeing this stuff happening day and daily right across the board. This is a social engineering attack, which has also then led to ransomware and data exfiltration, and we're seeing those happening again and again. I think Sam and Chris will talk about those in more detail as we go through. So here's a number of organizations. You'll know some of them, maybe not know them all, but they've all had a data breach at some point in the past. And normally it's been a result of something reasonably straightforward and simple that should have been done that wasn't done. And every month we can see something in the news. I'll not go through the decent details, but you sort of probably know some of them. Ransomware attack there in Kent. Nation states attacking research institutions for vaccine research. The schools and universities are currently being targeted. We've seen the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency with a data breach, and we've seen our own Queen's University there with a cyber attack recently, and likewise Bedfordshire schools where coursework was sort of destroyed. But these are just a sample of a number of attacks that are happening right across the board. The NICSC have just released in March this year their 2021 cyber security breach survey, and it tries to quantify a value around this. And I'm not sure the figures are reflective of some of the things that we're seeing. And again, Chris and Sam can touch on this in more detail, especially around the ransomware type figures. But we can see here around sort of £8,500 to £13,500, depending on the size and scale of your organization, is the likely impact of a cyber breach. And it's not just financial. It's, you know, time that you're not in business. It's reputational damage. It's the redirection of staff to try and recover. It's the investment that you might have to make to try and recover your data, to try and get yourself back up and running. It's also investment you might have to make in additional security measures if you've already been a target. So this is not just financial. What you also don't get through the likes of those examples in the video is the anxiety, it's the stress, it's the impact on family and friends. So it actually is quite significant. And again, you know, it would be great to have more real life case studies. So if a plea out there, if you have been a victim of a cyber attack, we'd like to hear from you and try and tell your story through some kind of an anonymized example to others, because it is that stress piece that is never recorded. The types of attacks, and I'll not go into detail. I know Chris will talk about some of the things that they're seeing in the banking section. But again, this is from the 2021 survey, actually. And we're seeing significant attacks through phishing, through social engineering. And we did a campaign recently on smishing, which is this kind of social engineering attack on the mobile phone, sort of text messaging service, where phishing is actually through email. So that's by far the most prevalent method of a cyber attack. But then you have email compromise, and this is where through weak passwords or through data breaches that people are being able to access other person's email accounts and then start to impersonate them. And as a consequence, then they're pretending to be your organization, then they can pretty much ask of others, of your stakeholders, money, services, redirection, scams, things like that. So again, we're seeing that as a follow-up second, and we are starting to see an increase now in denial of service attacks and malware and ransomware being deployed, usually as a consequence of one of these first two. So what is cybersecurity? And sometimes people hear this term and go, it's very complicated. I wouldn't understand that. But I want to try and dispel that myth here. It's not. Cyber really just means anything relating to computers. And security, as we know from day to day and daily just living, it's just being free from danger or threat. So effectively, cybersecurity is anything that relates to computers and how you can be free from danger or threat. And I suppose the challenge then is, well, what is that danger or threat? A threat is a person or a thing that is likely to cause damage or danger. And a vulnerability is what is your level of exposure to that threat. So if I lived in San Francisco, I would have a significant exposure to earthquakes. If I live in Northern Ireland, I have a very limited exposure to an earthquake. And the risk is simply the probability and the impact of a vulnerability being exploited. Simple as that. So cybersecurity is in effect just another variation of risk management. And there's a definition there of what we mean. So really just managing that vulnerability of an organization's computers, computer systems and data to cyber threats to reduce the impact to an organization's ability to operate and function. So the things, and normally we don't attribute this to cyber attacks, but things that you maybe want to consider in terms of protecting your systems, because at the end of the day, if they fail, then your business has a potential to fail. So fire, we know about this, fire and flood. So where's your IT equipment held? Is it likely to be? Is it over a radiator? Is it in the kitchen? Is it over a pipe? So it's just simple thinking through of where you're positioning your critical servers or your network equipment. As we work more and more remotely, there's more probability that we will be prone to accidental damage. So what would happen if your laptop or someone else's in the finance section, say, was destroyed because of Coca-Cola or a cup of tea or something spilling over? Is there data there that's not anywhere else? Obviously theft, we know that these things are more portable now and can be either lost or stolen. So what would you do if it was stolen? Is your data protected? Is it decrypted? Would the person who's stolen that have access to something that you may not want them to? Power failure, not as much as a problem here in Northern Ireland. And as we move more and more towards portable devices, it becomes less of an issue. If you're a larger organization, then you may have a number of servers and devices in a specific room. Does that get really, really warm in summer, really, really cold in the winter? How is that sort of temperature controlled? I think this is the last two here that I want to sort of maybe hone in a bit more detail. It's the idea of shadow IT, and this is where your employees or suppliers may actually employ other forms of IT because the policies that you have implemented are too strict and actually start to prevent them from doing their job. So the likes of, there used to be somebody would implement a new broadband service so they can get access to the internet and bypass all of the firewalls, or it might be simply emailing the documents or whatever out to your personal email addresses because the records management device within your organization is just too clunky or too hard to manage. So just have a look at that. If people are bypassing your policies or procedures, then have a look at them, because if they're not effective, if they're not working properly, then you've introduced a lack of security just by the very fact of having them. The other ones are at rogue devices, and again, this is where a supplier might come in, best of intentions, put something on your network, plug it in to help provide you a service, but you need to know about it. Has that introduced a vulnerability to you or your business in terms of basically a security hole that someone else could use their device because it's not secured properly to get access to your systems and services? So something to consider around your estate. This is what we normally associate with cyber threats and cyber security: is the people, the nation states. You hear about Russia, Iran, North Korea, China. The motivations, you need to understand the motivations behind some of these attackers. So if you're in research at the minute, pharmaceutical research or technological research, then you're more likely to become much more of a focus for these types of attacks from nation states. Or if you're and obviously defense or public sector. But by far the biggest area is through cyber criminality, organized cyber criminals. And there's probably a bit of a blurring between the nation state activity and the cyber criminality, and that there have been occasions where nation states are starting to employ cyber criminals to do their activities for them. But this is by far, they don't care who it is, who gets attacked by this, absolutely no conscience. All they want is something that they can resell or leverage to get money or advantage. The other sort of people who would be attacking you might be hacktivists. So if you're in environmental area or there's a geopolitical statement that they want to make, then the likes of Anonymous there, as you can see the mask, they would probably, you might be a focus of attack because of a statement that they want to make. The other ones are what we term hackers, and it's a kind of generic term, but it used to be termed script kiddies. These are people who are in the hacking community who actually just want to get kudos. Now, when I say hackers, there are various types of hackers. There are white hat hackers, of which Simon will talk about, the good guys who help organizations to see where the vulnerabilities are and plug them. And there are black hat hackers who just want to cause a wee bit of damage and malicious activity. So these are the black hat hackers who just want that kudos, and they might go after the likes of FBI or the NCA, or as we've seen in the past, sort of talk, just a big organization or a secure organization to say, I did that. The two on the right that you normally don't associate are your employees and your suppliers. And often more often than not, it's because these are accidental. So your employees may have access, to elevated privileges, administration accounts, and by accident have probably got more ability to do damage than they should. So have a look at who has access to what and see if you can control that to prevent that. You may have a disgruntled employee. So if somebody has left or been dismissed, make sure those accounts are being closed down so that you're not giving free access to someone who actually might want to cause you harm. And similarly, suppliers, we talked about rogue devices, but suppliers may be providing you services. And so have a way just to see if you can validate the level of security that your suppliers may be providing to you. Ask the question, how are you securing the services that you're providing to me? And if there's not really an answer, then have that discussion to see how that should be better managed. So why is this happening? Basically, people are making lots of money. This is a while back, but there's various figures bandied about. It is a fast number, 1.2 trillion. It could be more than that, but it's definitely an awful lot of money that people are making in terms of cyber criminality. The dark web, as you might hear, is fully commercialized. You can buy crime as a service. And again, Sam might touch a bit more on this as he goes through. But, it's very easy. And we've seen in the video there, absolutely no technical skill required from that young girl there to be able to execute that attack. Bought it, created the video, and her skill was to make people click. So cyber criminals are earning from exploiting us. And this is a bit of sort of a rough idea of what information would cost or be of value to the attackers. Now, if you consider they're getting maybe thousands or tens of thousands of hits worldwide on these, so the £14 quickly becomes a significant figure. And likewise, if you've got PayPal, bank logins, or medical details, those figures just go up. And it's a lot of it is non-targeted. It's what we would term spray and pray. 10,000, 100,000 emails sent out, and if they get a small percentage of those, they're making quite a significant return on investment. Where our attack surface, as they call it, we are using more and more devices. We're accessing more and more services, and the information that we hold on our devices and put across those services are very, very valuable. So we need to take some kind of cognizance as to how we are protecting those. And again, Chris and Sam will go through some of the basic ways in which we can protect ourselves so that we're not making ourselves an easy target for that. Some things I'll just draw your attention to, resources that are available both from our website or from the NICSC's website. There is the Small Business Guide. It's been out for a number of years. I think it's just been refreshed there last year. 5 quick, free or low cost steps that you can take to basically be better assured that you're more secure. Things like good password policies, patching, antivirus, things that you may be doing, but I'll take you through those steps in a bit more detail. Cyberware as well. I don't know if you're aware of the Cyber Action Plan that's just been released from Cyberware. Look at those, look at that side on NICSC. Again, you can access that through our own website. The action plan will take you through a number of questions that will give you a reassurance as to where you're strong and maybe some actions that you can develop then to improve your cybersecurity. A really, really good sort of survey that you can go through that actually then becomes very tailored to your own needs. One thing I would ask though is, as I said, in terms of resilience, is there's no such a thing as a perfect system, but it's better, as the scouts would say, to be prepared. What would you do if you were hit with a cyber attack? You got some malware, someone was encrypting your files. How would you respond to that? Have a look at the NICSC Cybersecurity Response and Recovery document. It takes you through these 5 steps. How do you best prepare? What's the information you need to identify? How do you back it up? How do you make sure it's offline so you don't, those backups don't become a victim of ransomware? How do you identify what's happening so you can quickly triage if If it's a cybersecurity incident, there's just one of your applications falling over. What's the steps you can do to resolve the incident? Who do you need to bring on board? Do you have access to your IT support team, either in-house or through a third party? Would they know what to do if you had a cyber incident? And again, have that dialogue and ask that question. Where do you report it through to? And I'll let Sam from PSNI deal with that one. But, you know, is it action fraud, or if you're actually dealing with in the middle of an incident, you know, how do you contact the PSNI here? And the most important piece is learn from it and share that learning across your colleagues, peers within the small business community. By all means, guys, there's not much point us having these events if we can't get some of this put into practice. We can lead a horse to water, but we can't make it drink. So a few takeaways before I hand over to Chris is put some of this advice you hear today into practice today, especially around passwords and two-factor authentication, which you'll hear later on. Understand what's important to your business to operate and protect it. So is it your point of sale systems? Is it your invoicing? Is it your ordering systems? Is it your website? What's important for you to operate, and how long can you have it down for? And then what are the steps that you can take if that was compromised in some way to actually get it back up and running? And what is the priorities for the other applications that need to come on board? Be prepared, have that plan, walk through it, see if it works, try it out, test it with your suppliers and your IT support to see if they're available whenever you might need them. And for us, just on today, you know, is this hitting the spot in terms of what you guys need in terms of the small business community, or are there other areas that you would like us to try and cover throughout the course of this year? There will be a survey at the end. We'll pop that in the chat now. By all means, give us that feedback. It helps us shape these programs as well. You can follow us at the Cybersecurity Centre. The email address is there, or on Twitter at our Twitter handle at NI Security Centre. Do that. We put an awful lot of information out there. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to hand across to Chris. I think we're maybe a wee bit over with my sort of FUPA, but Chris, if you want to take us away. Chris is currently the head of financial crime prevention in Danske Bank, and they see an awful lot of this stuff happening day to day. I would definitely be able to tell you that's sort of an emotional side of what a cyber incident has that normally goes unrecorded or unreported. So thanks for that.
Great, thank you, Joe. Hopefully you can hear me okay, and hopefully you can see the slides on the screen okay as well. As Joe had said, my name's Chris Wynn. I'm the head of financial crime prevention here at Danske Bank in Northern Ireland. So I have responsibility for a couple of different teams, but I suppose the one that's most relevant to our conversation here today is that team that I guess deals with that fallout that comes from when a customer is the victim of a scam or of fraud, and they tend to emanate from exactly the channels that Joe has already alluded to. So I suppose I just wanted to provide a little bit of a picture around what we see affecting consumers right across Northern Ireland. And I suppose given the audience that we have here today, I'm focusing in mainly on the business community, albeit a lot of the tricks and trends that are used to attack businesses are also used to attack individuals, and often it's the individuals attacked first, which then leads to something within the business as well. So there's very much a correlation between those two. There was a report that came out just in January this year from the Royal United Services Institute, and they stated that fraud against UK citizens, businesses and the UK's public purse had reached epidemic levels, and they noted it as being the volume crime of our time. It's a pretty bold statement, and the use of the word epidemic when we're in the midst of a pandemic is probably not uncoincidental. It's the crime that which most UK citizens are likely to fall victim to. So none of us expect ever to be victim of any type of crime, but the type of scams that we see in place today are really one that any single one of us could fall victim to at any point in time. We see victims ranging from 13 years old to 90 years old. I think there's a misconception out there that only the older or maybe more vulnerable individuals fall victims of fraud and scams, and that is completely not the truth. We have seen some incredibly well-educated people. We've seen incredibly professional individuals from law enforcement, from teachers, and even bank staff falling victims to scam. So anyone could be. And I think one of the really standout comments that came from this report was they noted that its impact in the private sector has consequences for both the stability of individual companies, but also the broader reputation of the UK as a place to do business. So it's basically saying that because of the volume of scams and fraud that we're seeing in the UK, that we may become less palatable for someone to come and do business here in the UK. And in some respects, that's one of the reasons why we see businesses sometimes not reporting fraud either to us or to law enforcement, because they feel that if the fraud is reported, that might get out to the public, and then that company may be seen as a less preferred solution provider, for example, because someone might think if your controls aren't good enough to prevent fraud, then how do you deal with the information that you have for your customers and so on? And has already been alluded to as well, fraud it's being conducted as an industrial scale. It is available as a service, just like you'd go on and look for a window cleaner or a carpet fitter or a plumber. You can go on, if you're that way inclined, and look for someone to carry out fraud on your behalf. And it is, a very anonymous crime. We've seen people in Northern Ireland targeted by the call center setups that are in India and South Africa. We've seen organised crime gangs operating within the UK. Recently, we've seen some activity in Leicester and Milton Keynes, which are linked to smishing, which Joe alluded to, and I'll come back to. And I think there's also the very stark reality that a lot of this is released to serious organised crime and terrorist financing, because the money has to go somewhere. And yes, some people might be doing it to fund a lavish lifestyle, but there's also some sinister undertones to what's going on as well. And I suppose I just want to talk very briefly through the journey of a scam. And to be honest, it's a very simple journey, and really has 3 steps. The criminal needs to get hold of the data that they will use to commit the scam and manipulate, and they can get hold of that from some of those data breaches that Joe has alluded to, but also from social engineering, which has also been mentioned as well. The term I'll come to in a wee second. Once they have that data, they'll manipulate it in some way, shape, or form, and then manipulate the individuals that the data is linked to get that little bit further. And then with the data, with the manipulation, then they can have the fraud take place. But I suppose the question is, how do they get that data in the first instance? And data breaches are definitely a big part of that. Because an organization loses something. Like I remember back to a number of years ago when Ticketmaster had their big data breach. I had a Ticketmaster account. My credit card was linked to said Ticketmaster account, and said credit card was then used fraudulently in the days after the breach. No coincidence whatsoever. So it's as simple as that. Something very much out of your control, but nonetheless, then you can get caught up in these sort of things as a result. And then social engineering is probably the more prevalent, and certainly today the easier way for criminals to get information. So the definition is quite simple. It's the use of deception to manipulate individuals, so you and I, or individuals within your organization, into giving away confidential or personal information that may then be used for fraudulent purposes. And I think there's sometimes a misconception that all the fraud and so on emanates from a darkened room with a bank of servers and this little guy in a hoodie sitting on a computer tapping away all the time. It's not as fancy as that. It's much more straightforward, and it does come from those fraud as a service schemes. And I suppose the scammers and the criminals that are behind this are very, very well versed at what they're supposed to do. If they applied their skills in a legitimate career, they could probably go very far, but they've obviously chosen not to. And they do not stop. They will continue going and going and going, and they don't really have a moral compass either. They will go after anyone at any time for anything, and that's effectively what we see all of the time. And I suppose when you sit and think about social engineering and what is their goal, well, their goal very much is to get information. So I suppose if I was to pose a question, and that is, if a stranger walked up to you in the street today and they asked you for your name, for your address, for your contact details, your bank account details, would you give it to them? And I mean, I think quite simply, the answer to that question would be no. You wouldn't hand that information over to a complete unknown, to someone who you do not know, to a stranger, to someone who's not trusted to you. But invariably, that is what a lot of the fraud and scams that we see reported to us today, that's where they start. A criminal seeks information, albeit pretending to be someone else or some other organization. And once they have that information, then they're able to manipulate it and then carry out the fraud. So the three main tactics that we see taking place today, are some terms you'll be familiar with. The first one I'll refer to is vishing. And you've heard Joe mention smishing, and you've heard him mentioning phishing as well. Vishing is effectively like a phishing email, which I'll come to in a second, but this is where you get a phone call from someone pretending to be an organization, pretending to be a legitimate company, and trying to get information from you over the telephone. So you're actually speaking to someone. Sometimes it starts with a robotic phone call, but invariably it goes down the route of actually chatting with another individual based somewhere in this world. A lot of that emanates from the likes of India and the contact centers there, which are, they're as big of a contact center as we have in the bank sometimes, insofar as their scale and what they're set up to do. And you often hear people saying, oh, I could have sworn it was someone in BT that I was speaking to, because you could hear a lot of chatter in the background. And that chatter in the background is other people being scammed. And sometimes that reality doesn't really hit home. But the organizations that they pretend to be can be wide and varied. We have seen them pretend to be Danske Bank. Other banks have seen the same sort of traits. They could be BT, they could be Sky, they could be HMRC, Apple, TalkTalk, the National Crime Agency, the PSNI, Virgin, Amazon, you name it, they've probably pretended to be them at some point in the past. And they'll always use well-known brands because there's a hook. If someone phones you and says they're phoning from Microsoft, you might think, oh, I've heard of Microsoft, I'll go along with that. But if they phone you up and give you a random name of a company you've probably never heard of before, you might stop and think about it a little bit more. And I suppose I just wanted to, and hopefully this audio works okay, I want to give you an example of what I mean by a robocall whenever I mention that name. And that's where scammers have got very clever. Instead of a scammer picking up the phone and phoning 30 people a day, for example, and of those 30 people, 15 might hang up. What they'll do is they'll employ a little bit of technology to make hundreds of calls a day using a robotic dialer and a robotic voice. And they'll basically get more people on the line, because that robotic voice will invite them to press 1 if they want to be connected to an agent. So if someone presses 1 on those calls, they've already got their foot in the door and they can be much more efficient. So their success rate of, say, 50% might go up to 90% whenever they use one of these robotic dialers. And it also means the people on the phone are the ones speaking to customers who are maybe a bit more vulnerable versus those who won't have engaged with them at all. So just to give you an example of some of they're doing the rounds at the moment, here's one from BT, for example.
You might need to share your sound, Chris.
Apologies, apparently the sound isn't coming through. I'll skip past it and maybe come back to it a bit later if we can. So phishing is another very prevalent one. Phishing has been around for a very, very long time. The tactics are exactly the same. An email lands into your mailbox. It has something enticing within it, and it invites you to click on a link. And that link might take you to another web page, or there might be an attachment on the email as well. And those can again come from lots of different organizations. You'll probably be familiar with the emails going around many years ago, supposedly coming from a Nigerian prince who were offering a massive reward and will get you engaged, but it's not really those types of emails we're talking about. It's the ones that come through looking like, again, they're from legitimate organizations. So again, just a few on there. And an example of one that does the rounds a lot of the time is Netflix. So you get an email in from Netflix to say your subscription couldn't be renewed. Obviously, everyone, if they're at home and they're wanting to watch something, they maybe want to see the latest episode of Bridgerton or the latest series of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, whatever it happens to be, you don't want to lose your Netflix subscription. So you'll think, oh, I'll quickly just go in and update my details. You click on the link, it takes you to what looks like a genuine website. You pop in your details and you think nothing more of it. TV licensing agency, very, very common one as well, as are ones from Google, from Microsoft, from Amazon, and all the social media platforms as well. And what the criminals are doing here is they want your logon details. They want you to give them that information because they'll use your logon details for something else, which we'll come to in a moment. And then Smishing is basically phishing using your text message service instead. So it's a text message that lands into your phone. The message will usually have a call to action in it of some description, and that call to action will be typically clicking on a link, which then takes you to a phishing website, much in the same way as the email would do as well. And they are immensely prevalent at this time. There are smishing messages landing in people's mailboxes or mobile phones every single day. And the reason that these have really scaled up of late is simply because the open rates for text messages versus the open rates for emails are night and day of a difference. I was on a recent webinar with an SMS provider, and they were saying that the open rates for SMSs are anywhere between 80 and 95%, whereas email marketing campaigns, the open rates are typically around 30%. And we're all attached at the hip to your mobile phones. As soon as it beeps, we'll typically look at it. And if you get a message and it says on it it's from your bank and you need to update your payment details, or there's an alert, you'll be enticed to click on that link and go a little bit further. And there's so many different types of smishing messages doing the rounds, but invariably it's the same thing. The link to a website, capture information, and then that information will be used at some point in the future against you, or against your organization, whichever way it happens to be. And I want to give you an example just of one of those right now. This is a very popular one, and it's the Royal Mail smishing message. It's got a lot of attention on the news. BBC's ran a number of stories about it. There was a victim on Twitter whose Twitter post garnered about 30,000 likes and about 5,000 shares because they fell victim to this as well. But quite simply, an email or an SMS pops into your phone, and the number that it comes from is typically just a random mobile phone number. Sometimes it might say a name at the top, but they tend to just use random mobile phone numbers, like burner phones, for those of you that like to watch Line of Duty. And this one just starts off with the word Royal Mail, and it says there's a parcel due, you've got to pay $2.99 shipping fee, click here to pay it, otherwise it'll be sent back. So most of us are probably ordering stuff online. Most of us at any one point in time have probably got something on the way. So if you get this, you think, oh yeah, I did order such and such, then I better update my details, otherwise it might not get it. When you click on the link, it takes you to a web page. This is the web page that it takes you to. The text at the top of that web page is exactly the same as what was in your SMS. But as you scroll down on the web page, then it asks you for your full name, your date of birth, your email address, your phone number, your address, your city, your postcode, your card name, your card number, your expiry date, your CVV code, your account number, and your sort code. And the number of individuals falling victim to this is phenomenal. And no one stops for a second and thinks, hang on, I'm getting a parcel delivered. Why do they need my sort code and account number? Why do they need to know my address? They know my address already, because sure, you're trying to send me a parcel. Your date of birth, why is that relevant? But no one stops and thinks about that. It's such an incredibly common trait, and that information is so valuable because that information can be used to carry out transactions. It can also be used to carry out impersonation calls, where, for example, we have seen direct correlations between customers giving this information away and then getting phone calls from someone pretending to be Danske Bank. And they'll know you to say Danske Bank because you've given the sort code which identifies the bank. And they'll regurgitate back the information that's been given in this message, or they might even say, oh, we think you recently got a message that was supposedly from Royal Mail. It wasn't, it was a scam, but don't worry, we're going to help you. And they'll lure you into this false sense of security. And another common one is through phishing emails, as I mentioned already. So here's an example that a customer sent us as well. I don't think there's any coincidence between the fact that Maersk Shipping was on Joe's slide about data breaches, but customer got an email from Maersk, supposedly from Maersk, I should say. If you look at the email address in the towards the top of the screenshot there, you'll see it's actually from a random Hotmail address, which would be very common, but the sender's name has been changed to reflect Maersk Line. And it says there's shipping documents attached. So there's attachment to the email. That attachment is actually a web page. It's not actually an attachment. And when you go to that web page, then it asks you to sign into your email to confirm your identity. So it's asking you directly for your email address and directly for your email password. Now, why would you need that to get into shipping documents? I don't know, but again, it's a very good way for them to gather details. And a lot of people are also lulled into a false sense of security when they see a little padlock. And that just means the web page you're on is secure, and what you key and how the criminals get it will be kept secure. Doesn't mean that it's a genuine web page, and criminals will increasingly use secure web pages to try and again give a false sense of security. And another example here is a link to DocuSign. So you think you're going to sign a contract or an agreement, It asks you to choose who your email provider is. So you click on that link, gives you a false login page. And again, it's just to capture your login details. And they can also use attachments on phishing emails to maybe infect your PC. So you might, for example, have a Word document attached or an Excel file attached. When you click on the email and open it up, you maybe get a message, something along these lines. And what it's basically trying to get you to do is to enable what's called a macro within that document. And that macro then might go and download some nasty bits and bobs onto your PC. So just as I come to an end here, I want to talk about two different types of fraud we see affecting businesses quite significantly, and often it all stems from the tactics I've mentioned before. Criminals have got access to email accounts, and as a result, they have tried to carry out a couple of different types of scams. So invoice redirection is quite simply where you've got emails bouncing backwards and forwards between yourself and maybe your supplier. A new email lands in your mailbox, and that email has an invoice attached to it, or is a request for a payment, or is a set of account details. And if you just go ahead and take that email as being genuine and go ahead and make the payment, for example, if it's an existing supplier that you've always paid before, or if it's a new supplier you've never done before, if you go ahead and make that transfer and pay the bill, then you'll think everything's hunky-dory, right up until the point that that supplier comes back and says, look, I sent you an invoice about a month ago, but I haven't got the money for it yet. Can you let me know what's going on? And the business often goes, oh, hang on, I did pay that. We did get your email a month ago and we've sent the details through. And they'll go off and have a look and say, oh, yes, I got that. Funds were sent on this date and I was sent it to your account that's with HSBC. And the supplier comes back and goes, oh, right, we bank with Ulster Bank. And then the alarm bells go off. What's happened here? And basically, and quite simply, what has happened here is the breach could have been at either side within your own business or in the third party. But essentially, a criminal has received an email, they altered it, so changed the sort code and account number, and then resent it on to, for example, you. And instead of that money going into the bank account that you intended it to go to, it goes into the account of the criminal. And the one piece of really simple advice that we can give to prevent that type of scam taking place is if you're ever making a payment to a new supplier, or you're making a payment to an existing supplier whose bank account details have changed from what you've used before, so the ones that you know are good, then you must always stop. Don't make that payment until there's a phone call made to the intended beneficiary to confirm that your sort code is this and your account number is this. And only once you get that validation do you go ahead and send the funds. I've got an example on the screen here of an email that one of our customers received. It was November 19 now, but effectively that email said, look, we're having an audit on our accounts. Please don't pay into this bank account at the moment. Please pay into this bank account instead. And attached to that was a PDF with a new sort code and account number. And that was the criminal just trying to get the customer to go ahead and transfer a different account. They didn't, they stopped, they phoned who they thought the email had came from, and they said, no, we've not sent out any such emails. And thankfully the fraud was prevented. That doesn't always happen. Just 4 weeks ago, we've had a professional services company fall victim to this exact type of scam. And as a result of it, I've lost £243,000. They sent 250. We recovered approximately £7,000 for them. So it can be a large amount of money gone in the blink of an eye because payments are immediate and they go straight away. So therefore, the criminals will move them on straight away as well. And in the UK last year, £52.5 million was lost to this type of scam. So a massive amount of money. And there's another type of fraud which uses a very similar tactic known as CEO fraud. And that's where someone in your organization will get an email from another party in the organization, ask them to make transfers or make payments. And again, that verification step isn't taken. So if I was sitting at my desk and I got an email from Kevin Kingston asking me to do a payment, I wouldn't just think, oh, crikey, that's a CEO, I better do it. I would stop for a moment, think about it, contact that individual, not on the email that I just received, but maybe pick up the phone or send them a Teams message and have a conversation and say, look, I've just got your email. Can I talk to you a bit more about it? You want me to make a transfer? Is everything okay? And that might not just be funds transfers. It might actually be requests by gift vouchers or requests to send goods to a false address, for example. So the CEO fraud and invoice redirection are the two big types of frauds that can all stem from, for example, a criminal getting access to an email account and somewhere you'd rather not have them. And that's me, Joe, so I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Chris. Really, really good advice there. And the different sort of what we would call attack vectors, the different types of scams that are out there. You know, that picking up the phone call and speaking to your chief executive or your senior manager and saying, listen, are you happy that I transfer this money? And not to be shouted out as a result, you know, is important. If you build that sort of comfort that people can challenge something where they feel it's wrong, even if it's not, is a good thing to do within your organization. I know we're still a wee bit sort of behind, but if I hand across to Sam from PSNI sort of Cyber Protect team, he'll give you a sort of an understanding of what steps you can take within your business to make yourself less likely to be a victim of this stuff, and sort of build up on some of the practicalities that you can take on board. So Sam, if I hand over to yourself, do a wee bit of an introduction and take us through your presentation. Thanks.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Get this. Yes, good morning. As Joe said, my name is Sam Kinkaid. I'm from the Police Service Northern Ireland Cybercrime Centre up in Belfast, where my role is sort of hopefully blend in some of the information you've heard from Joe and Chris, and you'll hear from Simon later. My role is dealing with organisations, whether they have reported an incident. There was mentioned earlier there about the hesitation some organisations have, or whether they're just after advice on how to better secure themselves. So really the aim this morning is to rather sort of go through the basic cyber behaviours that we would encourage, along with Joe at the Northern Ireland Cybersecurity Centre and other partners, that you consider adopting, based not on because we're saying this is right and other things are wrong, but these are based on the experience of organisations throughout the UK, Ireland, and wider field as to what actually works. What can you practically do that will reduce the risk that you've been told exists out there to your organisation? So the first thing, and this is one that it's a line that we used for a couple of years, perfect is the enemy of better. The aim here is not to bring an organisation to some sort of technical level that is beyond what they require to have in order to perform your basic function, which is to try and generate money. What we've found is that the majority of cybercrime is preventable by taking simple steps to secure your cybersecurity. And most of the stuff that we go through, it's not rocket science. It has to be said, it's not something you necessarily require technical expertise, but there's simple building blocks upon which you can sort of lay a foundation in cybersecurity that will enable you to avoid the vast majority of attacks that are out there. And in reality, the majority of cybercrime incidents that we see reported to us could have been prevented, or at the very least, the impact mitigated by taking these simple steps. And sometimes, as Joe had mentioned and Chris, you can have very difficult conversations with organisations when people realise that it is, in a real world scenario, a case of making sure you close the door, making sure you lock the door, making sure you turn the alarm on. And that if those sort of steps have been taken, the company wouldn't be necessarily in the position that they are in. And on the flip side of that, really the good news is the fact that if you take these steps, you are less likely to become a victim. Most of the attacks that you hear about in the news, at some point when you drill into them, they may have involved some form of very technical piece of code, but malware that's well written. But the actual deployment of that will have been based around, as Chris has outlined, a phishing email or smishing, and the ability to access your organization's network or to steal your data will have been down to somebody clicking or somebody having a weak password. But these are steps, thankfully, that you have the ability to actually secure yourselves with. And the main thing is, again, as we'd say, these are steps that the attackers know. So the advice that Joe gives out through the Northern Ireland Cybersecurity Centre and our partners in the National Cybersecurity Centre, the advice that the banks give out, that companies such as Simon, and you'll hear from Vertical Structure, and the police give out, this is advice that's well known by criminals. They know what we advise people to do, and they will try to get around that by attacking you by other means. So the first step, and this again, one of the things that we'll find, the first step that we would encourage people is look at what you want to protect. This is the opportunity, and the way that technology has developed over the years has been amazing. The way that certainly over the pandemic, companies have been able to adopt online systems and able to allow admin staff to work or to sell their products. has seen people adopt technology on a gradual basis without necessarily identifying what is it I actually have in my entirety. So we would, advise companies to sit down, take the time and work out, okay, let's get the lists going. What computers and laptops and tablets do we have? Removable media. Can we account for them all? Where are they? Look at, I think as Joe had mentioned there about suppliers, CCTV, telecoms, are just a couple of examples we've had where third-party suppliers have installed a system which requires a connection to your network. So at that stage, whilst you're getting, an alarm system, VoIP, telecoms, or CCTV, you're also giving somebody access to your system, and you're at that point relying on what password they set. Real world scenarios we've had in Northern Ireland is where we have had organizations compromised because a third-party supplier used password 123 to protect their system. Again, something that we wouldn't expect that you would allow yourself. Email accounts, you'll hear from Chris, email accounts is the big one. It's hard to put a number on these things, but certainly the vast majority of incidents we see at some point will come back to an email account. The company has been breached, data has been stolen or ransomware because they're able to get through a phishing email. The examples you heard from Chris about mandate fraud as well. Email accounts being compromised and taken over would be the ones that we see the vast majority of incidents linked to. Again, what data you're trying to protect. And the one at the bottom, again, is one people quite often forget. You've got your nice new box installed in your network, you've taken it out, and nobody's taken a chance to sort of change the default passwords. Again, if I know that you're using a certain type of technology and I can Google it and find out that the default username and password is admin, attackers will just take a broad brush approach, search for these things online, and if they can find them, have a go. Again, one of the things that people often forget is don't forget your best asset. It used to be you'd go to a lot of these sort of events and you'd hear from people telling you that staff were the big weakness, that staff were the ones that were going to compromise your system. But really, staff are your best asset. Joe referred to the recent cyber breaches survey. Again, there is an issue there, and that companies are not training their staff in essential steps such as how to avoid or detect phishing. Phishing works, as Chris has said, by targeting staff. If your staff are not trained, if they're not aware, if they don't know what to do, if they've clicked on something, you're actually opening yourself up for attack. The wee diagrams you see at the bottom there, two of the systems that we would promote. The National Cybersecurity Centre have a free tool online for training staff on the likes of phishing, and they also have a service that allows you to report a suspicious email to them, to report at phishing.gov.uk, which helps to protect other organizations as well. So if we talk about passwords, and this is the one that comes around all the time, and when we're having discussions with companies who feel they're at risk or who've actually had an incident, this tends to be the one that pops up. The NICSC's advice at the minute is around creating strong passwords using 3 random words. But the key thing is the fact that hackers can guess weak passwords, short passwords very easily. If they don't have a database or a dictionary of billions of passwords, they'll simply do a bit of research. And that's again where you come into like social media. If you're using passwords with your favorite holiday locations, your pets' names, your kids' names, or your date of birth, really, a bit of work through companies' house records, looking at local press articles and stuff that your company has pushed out, I will get there somewhere. So in general terms, the longer and more complex a password is, the more secure it is. There are obviously caveats around that, because password 123 is 11 digits long. But certainly, if you try to look at lengthening the password size, the better. Again, 3 random words, just a case of making it longer. So the examples you show at the bottom, where you have to have a number and a special character, can actually extend your password to the extent that nobody will hack that in. They will try to get it off you through the likes of phishing. That's just an example on the screen. That's actually from Belfast. So that's an example of what sort of things an attacker will do, where they have tried to get into the system. As you'll see at the top there, using the username administrator, and they'll start going through just very generic passwords. Password 123 at the top, because it works on quite a few occasions. And down near the bottom there, about 6 lines from the bottom, if you see there, they then change and go from username admin, and again, they'll repeat the process. And these can be automated tools that will run quietly in the background, undetected. So your aim is to create a password that will never appear in that list. Again, based on what we see from incidents, the main one we'd say is, concentrate first and foremost on your business email account. That is the one you need to protect. It has information about your customers, your business, and your finances. It also allows me to then access other accounts that you may hold. If that account is secure, then by all means move on to other accounts. But when we see the likes of email account compromises, we see malware being deployed, it really is concentrating on the email accounts that will keep you away from most attackers. And again, you see a reference there that Chris mentioned, attackers will reuse passwords like the data breaches. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if you're using your Facebook account password for everything, including your business email account, you're leaving yourself wide open. This is one that you may have heard of. It's one that we will sit down with organizations and give them as an example of a free service that you can use to try and improve your cybersecurity in relation to email. So Have I Been Pwned allows you to check your business email addresses for free against known data breaches. And really it's to give you an idea that in most occasions you're going to get information back that tells you one of your addresses is out there in the open. And you may be sitting thinking, well, you are a micro business based in Sandmills or Strabane or somewhere. Why would my information be of value? Why would it be out there? People reuse their passwords. You see the example there. Yes, LinkedIn. So you have a business link there, but MyFitnessPal, you have people using work accounts for there. Facebook, obviously, recently last week there was another issue raised with data being available online, and this information floats about, and it's for sale if you're not able to get it for free. So again, we would encourage people, take a look, work out, okay, am I exposed? If my employees' addresses are all coming up with MyFitnessPal or social media, do I need to look at a policy that says, right, you can't use your work email address for certain things? Because every one of those breaches, if people have bad password habits, exposes your organization to a risk. Again, trying to make things easier, to try and encourage people to create longer passwords. There are ways in which you can store them. This again differs from previous advice, but obviously you see there on the screen, big yellow post-it note stuck to the keyboard, still a no, stuck to the board. But try and encourage people to remember longer passwords. So if they can be stored securely in a safe, if they can be stored with password managers, that helps people to create longer passwords and secure their system. Joe had mentioned earlier on about dealing with securing accounts. This for us is probably the single best step that you can take as an individual, you can take as a manager or as an owner of a small business in order to secure your accounts, and that is two-factor authentication, also known as multi-factor authentication. It is something that you should be used to with online banking. You may have come across with social media, but where we see issues in relation to email accounts, in relation to websites, networks being breached, it tends to be that two-factor authentication, if it had been adopted and in place, would have prevented the vast majority of attacks. It reinforces the strong password that you've set up, but if I can manipulate you to provide the strong password to me, obviously you don't want me getting into your account. Once it's set up, it's fairly easy to use. You can use Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator is another app there you can see that will generate the code you may be familiar with that you would have had with the RSA tokens. But it really is, it can't be overemphasized that everywhere from ransomware to data being posted online and stolen, we have seen circumstances in the last 3 months, 4 months, where if two-factor authentication had been in place, that wouldn't have taken place, and the organization would have been in a far better position. When it comes to what else can you do, again, it's important to update your devices. And that brings us back to the first point about, it's important to identify what devices you have. If you have outdated software sitting on a PC, which is required to you, for your CCTV system that you've forgotten about and it's not updated, that becomes a vulnerability. Tech companies are working all the time. Tech companies are working all the time in order to try and update their system. The attackers know this. So the recent example of the Microsoft Exchange, once that was identified as a vulnerability, attackers are actually reverse engineering these things straight away in order to try and exploit them. Some of the examples you've seen recently, again, Microsoft Exchange, VPNs, which are a lot of organizations are using remote working. These are all things we've seen exploited locally in Northern Ireland and targeting organizations. Joe had mentioned just briefly about the ransomware. Again, the potential outcome is your information is put online for other people to try and buy or to download free of charge. So again, think to yourselves, okay, if I have information stored in my system, how am I storing it? Am I storing it encrypted? Am I protecting it with strong passwords? Can somebody get in purely by having the password that I've got? Or have I got 2FA in place? Making sure you're going to recover. Again, I'm not going to touch this too heavily because I know Joe had mentioned it. Backups are a requirement, absolutely, but it's the after effect. Are they up to date? Sort of recent examples we've seen are they actually backing up what you think they're backing up? Are you aware that, what's the time period involved here? Because we've had organizations where they have a backup, to try and back up their systems might take 2 weeks. So are you aware your company's going to be out for 2 weeks? Again, testing your backups is essential. It is a challenge for most organizations that once they try to deploy their backup, they then at that point realize I actually didn't back up the core software or the new piece of software that we acquired recently. And then just finally, I know we're pushed for time. Just the last couple of things to push are things that you can do yourselves that are acquire for free. Police Cyber Alarm is a free tool that the police across the UK are promoting, developed with a software company in England for the National Police Chiefs. It's a free tool that you can install, acting like a CCTV camera, as it describes itself, where it will monitor traffic, incoming traffic to your internet-facing devices. It's looking at your firewall and your router, and it will see, okay, is this traffic coming from a known command and control server being used by attackers? Is it somebody trying to get into your network? It doesn't see what you're actually sending out, but it provides you with a member as a regular weekly or monthly report to let you look at what's your organization facing and advice and steps that you can take. And at the same time, it provides us in the Cybercrime Centre with information about what sort of attacks are ongoing in Northern Ireland and allows us to sort of inform organisations better and, where appropriate, take action against anybody we can see in Northern Ireland that's behind us. The Cyber Action Plan Joe has mentioned, again, fantastic service. It gets that conversation started and it gets people thinking of, okay, why are they asking me about the passwords or my firewall or my backup? And if you don't know, as a lot of organizations won't, it allows you to have that information required to go to a third party and ask them, I need to talk about my firewall. And then finally, Joe had mentioned about reporting, and it is there are various ways in which you can report issues. Hopefully people now are aware of the PSNI's online instant report system, or the non-emergency 101 number. But you can also report if you're an organization 24/7 to Action Fraud using the telephone number there. That's a 24/7 helpline for organizations that will get information straight to you and start the reporting mechanism that goes through the various agencies in the UK who will deal with cyber, including ourselves. There's also the option to report to the National Cybersecurity Centre direct, where they will accept reports, whether you're looking for advice or whether you're looking to pass information on. And finally, that's just our contact details, but again, that'll be shared hopefully through the organisers in due point. With that, Joe, I'll just, mindful of time, I'll hopefully stop this sharing.
Thank you, Sam. A lot of good advice there, and like this, as Sam says, this stuff is happening. Can't emphasize enough the use of two-factor authentication. If you can put it onto your systems, especially your email systems, or if you're using the likes of Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud Services, make sure those accounts are well protected. The good thing about it is you get a notification, so it's almost like a default logging, that if someone who isn't you is trying to get into your account, you can start to take immediate action, and it's that immediacy, which is important as well. Look, I know we're behind. I want to give Simon an opportunity to just cover his piece. Simon is what we would call one of those white hat hackers, the good guys who help inform companies as to where maybe they should focus in on some of their security weaknesses, or actually identify that they're in a good place as well. Simon's part of, he's founding director of Vertical Structure, and I'll let him introduce himself more fully in that regard. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Joe. That's absolutely brilliant, and thanks everyone for the really useful discussions just now as well. So I'm not going to take up a huge amount of your time. I want to kind of talk about some of the bits and pieces that we see on a regular basis, and some of the ways in which I think that our organizations are getting kind of compromised, and it's it's happening all the time. Unfortunately, I speak with Sam. He's a lovely chap, but I speak with Sam more often than I would like sometimes, due to the fact that people are getting compromised, and and him and his team are coming in and being made aware of these incidents. So these things are happening. They happen a lot. When they happen to small businesses, they tend to have a huge impact, and it can be absolutely devastating. So just about me, I run and work for Vertical Structure. We do three things. We call it prepare, protect, persist, because obviously you have to have a tagline. We do training, so we go and talk to people about how we would break into things. We talk to people about making cybersecurity a kind of a part of what they do from a very non-technical basis. I like to think sometimes we work as a translator between this complex world of cybersecurity and and real life. We find in our industry people tend to use an awful lot of acronyms when they absolutely positively don't need to. So we like to try and think of ourselves as a bit of a translator. But as Joe said, we actually also do the security and penetration testing side of it. And what does that mean? Well, we have a group of very dedicated, brilliant people whose job it is to try and compromise web applications, software, networks, mobile apps, whatever we can get our sticky little hands on, we will try to break into. As Joe and Sam both said, we've come at this from the white hat sort of world. But all that really means is we're asked to do this. Okay, so we're asked to do this, and we're doing this with a view to help you to improve how the security of your organizations. Work with everyone from two-person fintech firms in the Ormo Baths to big challenger banks in London and places and massive insurance companies in the US, and everything and anything in between. And the final part, what we do is also around kind of certification, and that's about thinking that security is much more than just having a penetration test or having someone break in. It's also about securing your people, and Sam made some great points about that. People are your greatest assets, and yes, they sometimes get confused or sometimes click the wrong button, but you train your people up, and you'll find that life will be an awful lot better all around. So when we just think about the cybercrime landscape, and I'm not going to go through these in any real detail, but just to kind of present you with some thoughts about this. You look at some of the sizes of these breaches, and what can we see? We can see that back in 2015 we were looking at kind of 198 million, a couple of 400. There's a 412 million there for friend finder network. Around about here, it starts to get a bit more interesting for the firms who are firms concerned, because obviously the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, was brought in the UK under the Data Protection Act 2018, DPA 2018, and that means that people really these firms started to have an impact. So when they were breached, they then had to, they were then telling the ICO, and the ICO were then, starting to take some serious action. You look at some of this case, this British Airways one, for instance, and also there's another one, where's the Marriott? Well, they're right in front of my face. The Marriott one there, initially there were going to be fines for those of 100 and 150 million pounds, respectively, I think it was. They were then reduced, obviously, down over the last year, but still to 20 to 25 million. So these things have an impact. They have a massive impact. I also want to talk to you about, where the data ends up. And, you can see, got some screen grabs here of these dark markets that people were talking about earlier. On here, you can buy access to rewards accounts, booking.com details. What's that? $2, €2.46 in there, something like that. This one, I think, is also quite nerve-wracking. You look at this, you've got, this is buying access to people's machines. So this was taken in, you can see there, this was taken in December 2020 and just filtered down to be, I think it was London that we filtered it for. But in there, you can see you can access this person's computer, and they have access to lloydsbank.co.uk. They have they have 3.co.uk, login.live.com. You can get into their email potentially for that. And look at this grand sum it costs to do that. $10, $10. That's it. You have $10. You can commit some serious fraud. Okay, so it's out there. It's happening, and this is, as Sam said, a real it's a business. It is a real business. There's also this timeline here, which I think is really important for us to be aware of. The fact that when an attacker gets into your system, it's not hugely likely that they will let you know about it straight away. What they'll do is they'll hide, and they'll find out what's going on in your systems, and when are your backups taking place, and what useful information do you have on your systems, and then they'll strike. They'll shut down your backup processes. They'll take you, kind of take you by surprise, and try to work out, the best time for these attacks to take place. So 210 days. If you give my team 210 days in your systems, they'll be able to do some pretty nasty things. They're very, very good at what they do. We normally get between 5 and 10 days. And if you give us 10 days, if you give us 210 days, then we'll be able to do some nasty stuff. We've spoken a lot there about kind of social engineering and the issues that it can bring, and I think it's really important that that this is kind of discussed further. If I go to, hopefully you can still see my screen here. There's a service called urlscan.io, and look down here. What can you see here? These are all dodgy Royal Mail type transactions. Okay, so these are the sites that are hosting those SMS messages that Chris and Joe were talking about earlier. Look at them all. Look, reschedule-package.co.uk, ukroyal-unpaidfees.com, info-transactions-pending. There's loads and loads of these, and these are all active within the last 5 days. 10,000 results in total, with only the first 100 being shown. Okay, and this is sitting on 4 IP addresses, and is nasty. This last one was picked up only 2 hours ago. Only 2 hours ago. Okay, so I think that's a useful thing for us to be aware of. We've got to make sure that we know about how to deal with these things. And as somebody said earlier on, that a lot of these attacks, they don't necessarily, kind of look like attacks. They look like a genuine email. They look like there's a proper note. Look at this. This is a PayPal email. Now, what can we notice from here? Well, we can see from here that what they've done is they've tried to make it look like a PayPal account at the top. They've done a decent job here with a from address in there, which has worked out really nicely. They've asked for you to do something. Okay, they want you to do something, and you click through into the login and onto the resolution center, and you'll find that you'll rather quickly be compromised. Okay. So it's about understanding things like that actually that email looks fairly legit, looks fairly legitimate. So you might click on it, but it's about understanding what you would do if something were to go wrong. We use the fantastic NICSC exercise in a box. I don't know if anyone's ever come across it. I'll put a link into the chat in a minute, but we use that as a way to help small businesses to understand what they would do under certain situations. What would you do if your systems were to be ransomware? How would you approach this? And practicing that is one of the most important things you can do. If we were all face to face, you would all be getting one of these stickers. Oh, let's see if it can do it without blurring. That's a bit about it there. You'd all get one of these stickers from me, which says a backup isn't a backup until it's tested. And that's a big mantra. That's something you should be bearing in mind, that a backup isn't a backup until you've actually tested it works. Okay, and you've gone through that restore process. So if you run a small business, think about that. What do you do? When we were doing an exercise in a box recently with a client, one of the things that we found was that they were being very good about backups, that they were doing backups onto a USB drive every day, that the USB drive was then being swapped over every day, and they had Monday, Tuesday, all written on there. Found out that actually what they were doing was they were taking that home on the bus, on an unencrypted drive in one of the people's handbags on the way home. So what does that mean? Well, the risk there is actually more likely that somebody's bag is going to be stolen, and then you've lost all your data. That you're going to put your bag down on a seat, and the drive will fall out. Again, your data's then been lost. And all of those things count. So yes, the backups were working. Yes, the backups were happening, but there was a risk there that hadn't been considered, and that's why these exercises can be so useful. So I would definitely recommend taking a look at those things. Okay, so if you're doing your backups, that's great. Well done, brilliant. That's what we want to hear. But what you've also got to be aware of is you've got to make sure that you're doing them in an effective way. So let's think about passwords again. And I know Sam mentioned this, and so I'm not going to dwell on it hugely. But what I want to do is just to kind of put a couple of ideas in your head. Okay, so don't do this. Don't do writing the password in permanent marker on your keyboard. It's probably a bad idea. No post-it notes. It's probably no post-it notes. Probably a good idea. None of this stuff either. The only other thing I would suggest is thinking about what I want to kind of leave you with some thoughts about is working from home. Okay, so working from home is a very, very important thing these days. Obviously, we're really obviously all doing that these days. But what can we do? Well, there's a couple of bits and pieces that I'd like you to go away and kind of consider. Firstly, secure your device. Decent passwords, that's always good. Update the operating software. If you're asked to update your operating system, okay, if you're asked to update it by your system, then please do so. Secure your network. Making sure that you've got that on your router, that you're using a random password, that you're not just using some password 01 and admin and things like that. Because as Sam was showing, people are very clear about this. And make sure you secure your working environment. So what about backups at home? How do you back up your software and your systems at home? We're finding that staff are being targeted, and that there are very, very little that one can do. So think about that. Talk to your IT people. Don't just bring in Dropbox just because you think it's a good idea, but speak to your IT person. Ask them, how are we doing these backups? And in that way, you will really start to improve things. I'm going to leave you with this slide. Okay, it's this Swiss cheese approach. My colleague actually created this slide, and he's done this horrendous pun at the top. So I'm going to pretend that it's not there, but it's saying, "Don't let attacks go past your eyes." Just horrendous, isn't it? Absolutely horrendous. But what the approach that we're trying to consider here is this Swiss cheese approach. Okay, so if we line up the Swiss cheese in a certain way, and we have effective passwords, and multi-factor authentication and phishing good practice and password managers and antivirus, then the goal is that the holes don't line up. Okay, so if we have 3 out of those 5, we have 2 out of those 5, then we're building up a protection. Okay, and the last thing we want is for this to happen, is for the gaps to be there for everybody. Okay, so that's what we want to do. I'm going to leave you with that. So think about that Swiss cheese approach. Think about the 5 things that you should be doing and how you can make sure that you can protect yourself. Okay.
Thanks, Simon. And I think that's going to be the takeaway. As chronic as it is, everybody's going to remember that. Swiss cheese, don't let the text go past your eyes. So I think that's what people are going to remember. Definitely exercise in the box, really good resource, especially if you want to sort of test out your response to some of the cyber attacks, but if you're doing your be prepared piece. Conscious that we're over time by nearly sort of 10 minutes, but happy to take any questions that you may have around any of the subjects, or even if there's something that's concerning you. There's a good group of people here who should be able to answer whatever you come through with us. Laverne, I think you came through on some stuff around risk management. And I know Mark replied there around the stuff on the NICSC. I think the links will be issued out. Also look at the Cyber Essentials self-assessment booklets. We'll try and get those links in there. That's a good way to sort of step through key aspects of good cybersecurity. And it's sort of the foundation of a minimum level of cybersecurity that organizations are expected to have, as laid down by the National Cybersecurity Centre. So look, I'm happy to take any questions, or I don't see any other ones in the chat at the minute, unless I've missed them. Is there anything for anybody? No. Well, look, I just thank all of the speakers. Really good coverage of cybersecurity. By all means, guys, put this stuff into practice. You never know when you might become victim. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen a year from now. But unless you're prepared, you won't know. You will actually become one of those victims that Sam comes across and Chris comes across, which is actually in a very, very difficult place to actually recover from. And who knows what that would actually mean. Tara, if I want to hand back to yourself then, just to maybe close off the event.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I would like to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers today for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. It's given us all, it's been extremely interesting, given us all a lot of food for thought there in terms of how we can adapt and implement, and get more resilient towards cyber attacks. So thank you so much for that today. Really, really important, especially in these unprecedented times as well. So all that is left for me to do is say thank you for attending today, everyone. And to find out more information on any of our upcoming business events taking part this week, as part of our Enterprise Week, you can go online and register and get more information at www.derrystrabane.com. And if you have any further questions after the event and want to get in touch, you can get in touch with me directly, and I can put these forward to our speakers today. Also, my email address is tara.nicholas@derrystrabane.com. But all that remains for me to say is that I hope you enjoyed it. It was really interesting, and I wish you every success for the future in your own businesses. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.